Well, before applying the cartoon style, let's go ahead and generate the windows and doors. This is because when working with a cartoon style, we frequently find it necessary to utilize deformers. So it would be beneficial to establish the basic geometry initially and then proceed to apply those deformers. Let's check our reference. We can clearly observe that we have two windows positioned at the top. And one on either the left or right side of the house. So let's go ahead and create them now. Obviously it's pretty straightforward. You just need to insert the loops. So we are going to select our buildings at the back, and we're going to insert a loop. We're obviously going to determine the height according to the reference. It would be something like this. We select the other piece. They don't have to be at the exact same level, okay? Remember that the cartoon style has precisely that. Not everything is perfect. There are some crooked parts, some lopsided sections, and parts that just aren't uniform. So you are free to decide on the size and exact location of your windows. In this particular instance, adhering somewhat to the reference, they are centered. Therefore, you can consider all these various factors when you are building your model. So obviously with that face selected, the only thing we're going to do is extrude. Shift, right click, and we'll select extrude, or you can do the same from the edit mesh menu and look for extrude. We're going to extrude inward along the z-axis. It's good to extrude a little bit. Not too little, but rather a bit more so that we have enough space to create the window frames and other elements. We're going to do the same thing over here. We're going to hit extrude and pull it inward. Remember that we're the ones who decide how far in the windows go. Just keep that in mind, leave space so you have, the space, if you'll excuse the redundancy, to create the frames for the windows and so on, okay? We're going to generate the one down here. I repeat, in your reference, you obviously see the windows are a bit crooked because the windows were put in first and then the house in general started to be deformed or given that particular style. Of course, you are free to consult additional references as needed. The windows are typically a bit crooked, somewhat out of alignment, so to speak. They aren't always perfectly straight. In this particular case, they seem to be narrower in the bottom section. Therefore, it's always important to bear that in mind, okay? So we return to Maya. We have the two windows at the top. Looking at the bottom part and checking the reference image, it's exactly the very same thing there. We're going to insert a loop. Obviously, based on the human reference model that we have, we can determine its height of the window or how high it'll be. Here the loops are obviously turning out crooked. There isn't any problem with that. We are able to manually straighten them out using the vertex mode. It doesn't have to be exact, I repeat, but we do need to keep all these factors in mind. I'd even like to check this one. And it covers practically, it covers roughly 70% of the wall, and it's positioned exactly at a mid-level height. So I believe everything up to that point is absolutely perfect. Okay. And we are going to do exactly the same thing. Select and extrude it towards the inside. This is something really straightforward. Now let's move on to the door. The door size quite clearly is centered. Perhaps I'd like to make this particular piece a little wider here. I'm going to scale it. On the x-axis, let's widen it up a little bit. I feel like it's too narrow. These two pieces. The same applies here, obviously. We need to make them a bit wider. And the same for this. We just need to ensure that it's beginning to take on a proper appearance, alright? This central space is exactly what we need, considering these sections are slightly broader towards the top. So we have some space to play around with the geometry there. Alright, let's determine. The door is right in the center. I even think this window is perhaps a little too big. So what we can proceed to do is simply to select only these vertices. The ones in the back aren't even necessary. Remember to deselect by holding down the control key. So we can make it a little bit narrower, alright? Something similar to this. And regarding the door, we can also make that sort of hole or opening, like using the exact same technique we're using to create it, the window. Oops, let's insert a loop. And before we extrude, we're going to give it the specific shape we desire for the door. It could be something similar to this. If you notice, it's wide at the top and narrows towards the bottom. Therefore, it would be good to consider that shape. Remember, you can move between vertices with the arrow keys on your keyboard, I mean the direction keys. That can sometimes prove to be quite useful. So we're going to narrow the door and give it a more cartoon style, alright? Obviously, it's always important to keep this human reference in mind. Because, for instance, with the door, we've already determined its ideal height for a person to easily pass through and how tall it should be. The door is compared to the character or to any other character that might exist within this particular scenario. Therefore, that is precisely why this is so important. Also, looking at the reference, the door is a bit taller, it stands a little higher than the window. We can, of course, check other references. In this specific case, they are at the same level. It will really depend on the specific reference you are using. In this case, the door actually ends up a bit higher than the window. So it's really crucial to take all those different factors into consideration, okay? So in this case, I think that's just perfect. And since we already have the door shape, we simply select it and do the exact same thing, and extrude along the Z-axis. Okay? So in this manner, we now have the doors and windows distinctly marked within our 3D model. What remains to be done, you ask? We've successfully established the basic geometry, which would be just this. If you notice, everything gets covered, meaning everything will be detailed. The roof tiles, I mean, this is the basic shape, but some tiles will go here, more tiles will go over here, a pipe will go down here, the window frames will go here. So this is like the skeleton of our house, which is perfect. Let's give it that cartoon style. Let's give it a shape that's a bit more captivating now. Based on our reference, the foundation, or rather the ground, what would be the floor, is narrower than the base, okay? The floor is narrower than the base. We can approach this in various ways, for example, by entering vertex mode. I want to comment on the various ways we can do it so that you can use the one that interests you most. Keep in mind that this course isn't extremely basic. Instead, I'm here to provide you with the technique, and you'll then determine which method is most effective for you. You could try this approach. One method involves adjusting the vertices. For example, if you want to make this section wider at the top, you could switch to vertex mode, then select all these vertices and begin to broaden it. However, the method I prefer to use involves deformers. I'm going to use the piece we have right here as an example. What I would like is for these vertices to even them out a bit more. You can activate this axis, hold down the V key and the mouse wheel as if it were a button, and there you go, you snap it here. Or the other way, you simply activate snap to vertices and move it a little, so that these no longer point upwards but become more like flat lines instead. That really helps to make the geometry look a bit more polished and refined. Same thing here. We'll move it downwards and then do the same thing here. So let's attempt to accomplish that. Obviously, that is formed when we construct that particular type of gabled roof. We are going to proceed with doing exactly the same thing. Remember, to isolate an object, for example, this building might get in the way while we're working here. You select the object and navigate to the show menu, then isolate selected, and you'll either hit view selected or use the control 1 shortcut. This will hide everything else. This will hide all other objects in the scene, and it will only show you the one you currently have selected. Therefore, we're going to ensure we adjust this geometry in this specific way. Another thing I'd like you to be aware of is that when you utilize deformers, they will inherently distort objects not only according to the number of edges you input, but also based on the quantity of geometry present within them. So because this building has geometry at the top but not at the bottom, you would end up with a very sharp, abrupt angle right here. So if we want to play around with the geometry a bit more, we need to insert a few more loops, okay? In this manner, we have a bit more geometry to experiment with. I even think we can actually eliminate this. To delete it, we simply select the whole loop, double-click, shift, right-click, and choose Delete Edge, or we can find it in the Edit Mesh menu. Let's find Delete Edge. There it is, Delete Edge Vertex, okay? And we can, for example, move this one a bit further down. We need to turn off Snap to Vertices so that the geometry is distributed a little better. Once you've finished working with this model, all you need to do is press Ctrl 1 again, and that's it. All the objects will then reappear. We're going to perform the exact same action with this next one. We'll activate Snap to Vertices, and in Vertex mode, we'll start moving it slightly downward. We're going to insert the geometry, a little more geometry. This helps in achieving that cartoon style. Hit Ctrl+1 once more. Alternatively, you can access the Show menu, then Isolate Select, and finally View Selected. Okay? We're going to do the same thing here. It's a bit different in this particular spot, because with the door and the window present, we won't be able to make all of the vertices perfectly horizontal. So here, we're only able to perform this action in the specific areas where it's feasible, such as this particular section. Okay, I'm going to isolate the object, the base house, the back part here too. Again, this is just to make your geometry look a little more polished. Quite often for our demo reel, we actually need to showcase a display of to display the wireframe or the mesh of our model to see how it's structurally composed. So this kind of thing helps with that, making the model look a bit more polished. The model. Remember, I'm moving it here, but I'm bringing the mouse closer to the specific vertex where I want to attach it. Alright, we can apply the same method here. Same thing here. So that the loops look a bit more straight. So our geometry or our mesh doesn't look too altered, something along those lines. It looks like we're doing well so far. And this house in fact possesses good geometry because we already have obviously the upper faces, the lower faces, and we have 1, 2, and 3 loops that partition the model, so we should have sufficient geometry. Therefore, let's conclude the lesson at this point. For our next lesson, we're going to give our house that distinctive cartoon style, alright?